is supporting the 4% lodging tax. And the State League of Women Voters will be putting out a pro-con statement on the constitutional amendment, and I think that's still being drafted at this time. But if you look on the website, you'll be able to find it eventually. Candidates have also provided information and literature about themselves, which is available on the very back table. Let's see what else we have on here. The general election will be Tuesday, November 4, with polling places open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., or you may vote early by completing a ballot at the county clerk's office. The voting opened last week on the 29th, I believe, and is open through November 3. Or you can request an absentee ballot from the clerk's office. Election information can be obtained from the county clerk's website or from the Wyoming Secretary of State's website. If you are not registered to vote or need to change your voter information, you may do so at the clerk's office or at your polling place on election day. And you will need a picture ID. And did I get that all right, Jackie? Okay. Then on the back table, we also have sample ballots for the election, and a precinct map is on the wall. Question, we do have a timekeeper who will signal you by holding up a sign when you're approaching your time limit and at the conclusion of your time limit. The moderator may edit questions for clarity and appropriateness and may ask further questions to help expand upon an issue. In addition, the moderator may also vary the allowed response time based on the complexity of the question and overall time constraints of the forum. In the last 20 or 30 minutes or so will be given over for informal conversation. And now I'm going to turn things over to our moderator tonight, who is Dr. Oliver Walter. Ollie came to UW and to Laramie in the fall of 1970 after earning a PhD in political science from the University of Illinois. He spent his entire career here at UW. He was the department head of political science for 8 years and then was the dean of arts and sciences for 24 years before retiring last spring or summer 2013. Anyway, welcome, Ollie.
I must say we're not lacking questions, and there's about, each one of you would average about 2 questions here, so we're going to do this for an hour, so you're not going to make it. So let me ask the candidates to each introduce themselves, and they'll confine to their name, okay?
Jason Tangeman.
Donna Coffey.
Ruth Castor.
Steve Hammaker.
Alyssa Katzwasser.
Okay, be sure to talk into the microphone, and as we go, sometimes we'll start from that end, sometimes this end. Okay? So, would you like to start? Absolutely. All right, we'll start on the other end. No. Are you pleased with the climate in the district, and how would you improve it?
No, not necessarily that I'm pleased with the climate in the district. It's probably one of the reasons I'm running, and one of the ways that I would seek to improve it if I'm elected is to try and improve some of the accountability between the administration and the school board.
I'm not necessarily agreeing with the climate. I believe that there's not enough communication between all parties that are the stakeholders in our district. I think we could do a lot to foster trust. I think, having been out of teaching for a while, that I want to do, if elected, I want to do some research and look at issues that I believe have been skirted. I think there needs to be more input into the high school, and I think we need to start early with the input on the 2 new elementary schools. And I think there's some other issues that I'm not necessarily aware of, but I think maybe on the horizon. And I really believe that climate is very important, because we need to have everyone working together, and trust is a part of climate, and I'm not sure that there's a lot of trust among the parties right now.
Climate. I've never seen the district with such a low morale right now. It's a huge input problem. There's a huge trust, respect, and as a board member, I'm hoping that we can bring people together to understand that this is a community, that school is community, and we talk to teachers, and there is not that fear of retribution, that things aren't just selected and given to you. I do feel that the more communication we have, the more input we have, the better our school climate will become for parents, for students, for teachers, for administrators.
When I ran for school board 4 years ago, I ran because I was concerned about the climate in our schools, but not teacher, employee, administration climate, the climate that our kids were learning in. I ran and worked very hard to change that, and I have to admit I was surprised to learn that I was joining a board at a time where there had been serious disruption and concerns and conflict in the time before I got on there. And I committed and worked very hard over the last 4 years to try to improve some of the relationships, especially between school board and administration and employees. I think we have a long ways to go. I think we'll never be done. I think continuous improvement in our district is something that we all need to be working on until we get to a point where our children are walking into our schools feeling comfortable, engaged in learning, and they want to be there in the mornings. Thanks.
My biggest issue with, and the reason why I ran and actually discontinued my employment with this school district has to do with the communication, the transparency, and the accountability, which we've been hearing about. When it comes to communication, we have had a very one-way, one-direction oriented communication, and there needs to be involvement in all the stakeholders. Every person who feels committed to our school district should be able to have a forum, to have their voice heard, and I have not seen that as the case. In terms of transparency, there are decisions being made in our school district where, yes, we're not having communication, we're also not understanding why certain decisions are being made. We're not being allowed to have the input and then response so that we know where the decisions are being made, why they're being made, what the elements are. And that is something that I would be committed to providing.
Okay, so we seem to be a little bit dissatisfied with communication and the lack thereof. What specifically, though, would you do to improve this? So what specifically is the fault of all this? Well, why has this developed the way it has? If you're all kind of in agreement.
Why has the communication failed?
Yeah, what specifically would you do?
Okay. Specifically, we're not, the teachers and students are not being asked as to how to develop, how to move forward. There are so many media. There are so many media available to us for questioning and receiving response, and they're not being used, and they're not being encouraged. Just having a questionnaire on a web page is not sufficient for going and getting information. And what I have had personal experience with is that when I have asked questions, I have not had any follow-up. I have not had my board representatives responding to me, coming back to me, saying, has this been satisfied? Is your problem taken care of? And so I would make sure that there were other forms of communication, not just an occasional survey.
It's impossible to answer this question in 90 seconds and come up with all the solutions. But as I've looked at this over the last couple of years, I've realized that the key to communication in our district is middle management. And we live in a small community, we're all used to relationships, but I had to recognize that Dr. Recht and our administrators cannot have individual relationships with 800 employees, 3,500 kids, all the parents. It's not how it works. And in a system this big, it depends on the people in the middle to communicate properly. And that also depends on two-way communication. We have to have people in great positions to be able to go out and seek input, transfer that information up and down the chain appropriately without modifying it or influencing it. And it works both directions. And in many of the cases where I've seen people get frustrated with some of the systems and lack of communication and that kind of thing, after studying it for a while, I've realized that the breakdown is somewhere in the middle. And so I think that as a school board, our focus needs to be on developing those skills, making sure that the systems are working, that people have access to provide input, and also to hear some of the decisions that are being made. School board meetings are public, decisions are very public, anybody's always welcome, but in our system, it doesn't necessarily work to expect all 800 employees to be there providing input for every decision. So we have to have those systems in place.
Okay, I see site-based. We used to have site-based management. Site-based is a key for our communication. I mean, we see that that's a problem. We need to start building procedures back into our school system where teachers have input, principals have input, central office has input, and it goes a two-way street. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort, but we're here for the kids, and that's what we need. We need a piece so when a teacher walks into the classroom on the first day of school, they have their books, they have the room, they're ready to go. You can say, we're not gonna, where am I gonna put my kids on the first day of school when there isn't a classroom for them? That should not happen. And that needs to be communicated to the board. I don't know where the breakdown is. The board does not get the information that they need, but I can tell you as a board member, I will be in the schools, I will be asking teachers, and that's my strength, having just come off from 35 years in this district. I know how teachers feel, I know what's going on. And we need to get that communication and respect back for our teachers so they can have a more positive learning environment for the kids.
Well, at the present time, I'm the chairman of the hospital board, and one of the ways in which we do business and communicate is to have committees, board committees, and I would look into that if elected. I agree with I agree with Ruth that we used to have lots of different ways. Yeah, I know. Senior moments, what can I say? We used to have all kinds of ways. Over time, those ways have eroded so that there basically is not much going up and down the chain. We do have, they aren't calling them department heads in the junior high and high school, but they will function much in the same way. They've just started those back up. I think there's a lot of things that we could look into that other school districts are doing also. It really concerns me that when community and employees ask for a phone call, the phone calls are not returned. When they write emails, the emails are not answered nor acknowledged. That's a real breakdown in communication, and I think that needs to be addressed.
I think the question is, what would you do to improve communication? And I perceive this more as an accountability issue. My experience, limited as it was with the board, was the board didn't demand answers to their questions. And for example, I think there's a culture that needs to change on the board about the way meetings run. There needs to be an agenda that's vetted. There needs to be information that's provided to the board members beforehand in a timely fashion, in a complete fashion, so they have all the information and can ask meaningful and insightful questions to the administration. And there's a real dialogue, and it's my perception, at least on my limited experience, that doesn't really occur. And I think if there's accountability to the administration for the give and take that should occur on other boards that I've participated on, then I think that would improve communication.
Okay, thank you. This one came up about 10 times. Of course, I got 100 questions here, but do you have conflict of interest?
Not to my knowledge. I do practice law here in town, and certainly conflict of interest is something that could come up because of who our firm represents and that sort of thing. And that question has come up to me before. If I have a conflict of interest, I obviously have to recuse myself from any vote, anything that I have a conflict of interest. Currently, I'm not employed. I don't make any money through the school district. My children, are, of course, go to school in the school district. I guess that's a conflict of interest. But
We all have it then.
but my wife's not employed by the school district. She's employed by the city, and so it would really come through my business. And currently, I don't perceive any conflicts of interest. But that doesn't mean one might not arise.
Yes, I have conflicts of interest. My son, who runs coffee engineering, occasionally bids, and my daughter-in-law works for the school district. And I know lots of people in the school district and love them. And I have grandchildren in the school district, and so, but being on the hospital board, it's the same conflicts of interest that I had there. And so I know when to declare those and what to do about it.
I feel like I live in a hole. I don't have any conflict of interest. I just feel like there's nothing I can think of at this point that would be a conflict. Nobody in my family is employed by the district. You know, I just have tons of grandkids and kids I've taught, and that, you know, I just want to make things better for them. So I don't see any.
I learned that there's two answers to this question. The official, do I receive any financial benefit for any member of my immediate family? No. There's no relationship like that whatsoever. There are some perceived conflicts that I do want to share. First of all, I'd like everybody to know that I just met J.D. Hamaker for the first time 2 weeks ago. He was working out in front of my house. But he is a relative. He's about a third cousin. I have no relationship with him, but often that comes up, people thinking that contracts for construction are somehow influenced by my relationship with him. Also, people are probably very aware of the last couple of years where we worked with the county to purchase the Nellie Isles building that Big Brothers Big Sisters, my employer, is in. That relationship closed. We closed on the building. The county bought it from the county in July. And all through that process, it was a conflict for me, and I removed myself from any discussions, completely left the rooms, made sure I wasn't trying to influence the votes or anything like that, because it was a concern for my employment. I will also share that I do have a daughter who's in 6th grade, and I have learned in my 4 years on the board that sometimes that can be a conflict, and you have to be very careful as a board member to separate your roles as a parent and a school board member. Thank you.
Hi. No, I do not have any conflicts. I do have a daughter that is a senior. She's the last of 4. The others have all graduated from our high school. And I'm not employed by the school district, and nobody in my family will receive any benefit from my being your school board trustee.
Okay, so maybe this is kind of the last kind of question, but it's on this subject, but it's kind of on the other side. Almost all of, good Lord. I don't want to swallow it. Almost all of your comments on climate focus on teachers and students' morale. What about input from parents and taxpayers?
Who are you starting with?
Food. Yeah.
What about input from parents and taxpayers?
Parents and taxpayers.
Parents are taxpayers, and there are people in our community that don't. In terms of communication, like Steve had mentioned, all of our school board meetings are open, and anybody is welcome to attend. But in terms of communication, people have to take a responsibility as well to seek out forums, to find information, to ask those questions. Any person who were to ask me a question would receive their response. Parents are encouraged to seek out information, to talk with their principals, to send requests. School board members are responsible to be in schools and to seek out information from many different forums that they attend. I think that there's vast opportunities for parents and to give their input.
We've had this discussion several times, and I think sometimes board members fall into the mistake that our constituents are our employees. And I think they're included in that, but I think our primary constituents are our students and our parents. And I'm lucky in my position, I have access to a lot of families every day, and I'm able to approach many people, raise topics, try and get some feel for what's going on in our community and what the population is thinking. I have found it frustrating as a board member because everything is published and information is out there, but exactly what Alyssa was saying, sometimes it's not noticed until after the decision is made and it's published in the newspaper. And so I think as board members, we have a responsibility to be out in our community, talking about what's coming up, making sure that we're listening and giving people a chance to pay attention to some of the important decisions that are coming. As far as taxpayers go, that's all of us. And I think it's a similar answer. I think as long as we're listening and creating opportunities for people to talk, that's how we go about making wise decisions as board members.
I love the taxpayer question. So we just got that notification in the mail a week or two ago from, I do believe it's the treasurer's office, and it puts, school mill this dollars, school, tax dollars down. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, whoa, there are a lot of people who are paying a lot of money who don't have kids in school, but they're impacted. They are completely impacted by this. They should have a say on where those tax dollars go, or this building of this new state-of-the-art high school. It's a state-of-the-art high school, but we need input. We need input from that committee that was developed. It needs to continue till those doors are open for kids. That committee needs to be active and involved on a regular basis, like we did when we built Spring Creek, when we built Indian Paintbrush. It was an every other week meeting or get together or informing us of what was taking place. Changes could take place. Parents, had input. Taxpayers had that input. And parents, what would we do without parents? I mean, it's their kids that are coming to us. I certainly hope that we have a more open communication for them, that they feel that they can come anytime to anybody with a concern and have it dealt with. It might not be to their liking, or could be, but at least they know they're listened to.
I just love the public, and I love to talk to people in the public about what's going on at the hospital, and I look forward to doing it if elected from the school board. I just think it's really important. Mike Massey was talking to me the other day about some things, and one of the things that made him really sad was that he and his committee raised the money for the high school, and then basically were dismissed. And their input could have been so wonderful, and I don't understand why they weren't asked to continue along and come to and be apprised of what was going on. I think opportunities have been missed because of the way in which the administration has chosen to do things. I'm not afraid of the community. I like the people. Schools can be a very intimidating place if you weren't terribly successful. You don't necessarily want to come to the school, and so sometimes we need to go out and seek input. It's also very important to have things to talk to people about. You can't just say we're going to have a meeting and have no topics. So I think that we can do some things, some committee work, some invitations at schools for opportunities for people to participate, and I'll look forward to trying to find some more.
I'll have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Hamaker on the comment that everything's published, everything's out there. My experience on the committee related to the high school was we were supposed to be an advisory committee that was sort of a conduit between the public, the taxpayer, and the school board and the administration. And it was a real struggle to get information, whether to get it be put on the website or to get it to us. And, you know, a public board meeting is pretty useless if the administration is not providing meaningful and timely information to the public, to the taxpayer, so you can come to a meeting and ask meaningful questions. In my limited experience, that didn't happen. And so that's kind of the theme I've been talking about here, and something that I think you challenge the administration and do some accountability and try and provide more information to the people, to the taxpayer.
I must tell you, this is the first time my wife has ever told me I've been too quiet, so I'm going to speak. Okay, we've all heard about, reading in the Boomerang and so on, about the vocational amount of space devoted to vocational classrooms. What is your take on this controversy?
I sat through lots of meetings about this topic, many hours of meetings on this topic, and I will say that at least our committee, the way we understood it was shaking out was, look, times are changing, and maybe the way that VocaSpace is configured and the amount of it should change based upon the 21st century. That's a fair enough conceptually idea. I was sold on that idea. But the answer also was, we're going to partner with WyoTech and with LCCC, especially LCCC being right across the street, and partnering with LCCC and WyoTech in conjunction with changes in time, we think we can satisfy both here. So when I saw the article in the newspaper in the Boomerang, there's no reference to the partnership at all with WyoTech or LCCC, and so I am left back to a year and a half ago where I remember Arvin coming and bringing up good questions, and maybe we're back to where we started with that question, because I thought it had been answered to some degree.
Well, I'm only a kindergarten teacher, so I don't really understand those issues very well. I do know that I have never met a shop teacher, or for that matter an art teacher, who had enough space to store student projects. So if you're going to cut down on the amount of square footage in your classroom for those purposes, the first thing that's going to go is probably the space where the students work. And that's a terribly critical part of any vocational class. The kids have to have at some point hands-on stuff. They can learn through simulation, I think that's fine. They can learn with other pieces of equipment, but in the end, they have to get their hands on stuff. And they don't finish on time most of the time in my experience. And I'm not sure that it has been well thought out. I don't know. When they say there's going to be a classroom, that really is not going to solve what I see as the overall problem of hands-on sorts of things. And so when I'm hearing from my teacher friends that they haven't really been very consulted about what it is that they are getting from in the buildings, in their classroom, at the high school, it is concerning.
First thing that came to my mind when I read that article was our student population is increasing. We're looking at a high school that now has 10, 11, and 12. We're going to add 9 to that, which is going to make that even larger, and yet we're going to cut the space. The other piece I saw was the teachers are trying to give their input and their viewpoint, and once again, I'm not seeing where it's heard, where it was being responses to that. It just seems like we've got this battle going on, which has got to stop. Is listen to your teachers, listen to the people who are in those rooms with those kids. Safety. I mean, the number of kids, you have kids that are getting turned away from classes who want to take these classes, who need to take these classes, and they can't because there isn't enough space, and now we're going to cut it down even more. So I think that's a true issue the board needs to address. It should not be, the top 2 in the administration. This is a whole group project here. It's community, it's teachers, it's parents, and it's all about the kids.
I support career and voc ed. I think a lot of our students really benefit from that kind of hands-on learning. They're not all on a pathway to go on to college and those kind of things, and I think it's important that we include that in our education for all students and have that opportunity. I'm under the impression, and I can remember, that as a community, the coalition group, the school board, when we first came out with our first plans, we included expanded labs. There was some general agreement there. When the bids came in $8 million higher than we could afford, we had to go back to the drawing board, and to this day, we'll be opening bids later this month. I believe there's 35 additive alternatives, not just expanding the vocation labs. And I think as a school board member, we need to be very careful because we're gonna have to set priorities. And we may not just be talking about that one issue. We might be talking about other spaces, and we're gonna have to make some pretty tough decisions based on what those bids come in like, what the construction costs are gonna be. And I think it's important that we go back as a school board and we carefully consider those things. We take input from the community. We look at what those decisions are gonna be. So I'm not willing to promise that, yes, I'm going to support expanded vocational labs because I don't know yet what that's gonna look like and what those priorities are gonna be. Thanks.
Vocational education is very important, and it isn't important just for students that are going off to college or not going off to college. It is a place where there's practical application of things that they're learning in school. So yes, I highly support the vocational education program. I recognize that vocational education is going to change the way that things are taught, but when there are safety concerns, when we cannot physically fit the students into those classrooms, a different way to approach this needs to be accounted for. The other part of this gets right back to communication and this notion of consensus and this notion of everybody being heard. And I really think that that's the big problem here, is that we are not listening. We're not listening to the people who are teaching these classes. We're not listening to the students who will be in these classes. There are a lot of voices to be heard, and when they're not being heard, they're feeling completely disjointed. They cannot recognize that what's being done is in anybody's best interest. We need to listen to the opinions, and we need to find forums to do that.
Well, I'd like to compliment all of you for staying on time. This is really pretty good. Starting with you again.
Yes.
How would you characterize the district's hiring practices over the last several years? Do you feel that there is adequate transparency and that the district is hiring the most qualified people? That's a pretty broad question, but somebody ask it.
I don't have a lot of experience with the hiring practices. I was hired 4 years ago, and I work at a school here in the school district. I do know that at the school where I was, we would hire by committee. I do also know that there are teachers all around our school district that are administratively placed and not always in the best fit for a particular building. But I don't have very specific information about the hiring practices and what has happened in recent time.
I've had the opportunity to sit on several hiring committees, and I found them very balanced. Most of them I walked away feeling like the entire group reached consensus. There was general agreement as to who the best candidate was. And so because of those experiences, I felt fairly confident that we were doing a good job of building committees to make recommendations that had a nice mix of people, different opinions, different thoughts, and different skills and strengths that we were looking for in employees. I have heard concerns that there are behind-the-scenes activities going on, or that we hire secretly, or nepotism, some of those kind of things. And the ones that I've heard about and checked into myself, I've been satisfied that that's not what happened. I'm always interested to hear those kind of things. I'd also share, if I have time to squeeze in, I know there's a big push to get hiring policies in a very strict procedural format in our district, and I exercise caution on that idea. I think it's the role of this board to set policy, not procedure. And I think as administration changes or we change principals and staff, I think their priorities and the way that they go about hiring should have some flexibility. And I don't want to corner future boards or future staff into having to follow very strict hiring procedures, because I think it'll change over time. Thanks.
I agree and disagree with Mr. Hammond here. I do think we need procedures and policies in place for hiring. We used to have site-based as our means of hiring, which there would be, you know, you could volunteer to be on the committee for hiring, or your principal could ask you. And now it's, that piece has somewhat gone away. And there's a lot of, yeah, you know, there is a little nepotism, there is a little behind the scenes. But what concerns me the most is when you know you have openings, there's no reason you should be hiring a teacher a week before school starts when you know you have an opening. There's a lot of things that, you know, you have an opening, this is what you do. You get that person hired so they can be ready and prepared to walk into that classroom with those kids on that first day of school. I don't feel that people who write letters of recommendation for candidates should be on the interview team. There are things like that I think we need to have some policies set in place that does not take place. And when we voice our concerns about that, it's ignored. It is absolutely ignored. So yes, I do feel we need to get back to site-based so we have, teachers have the input, principals have the input.
Good hiring starts right with the man who is in charge of HR. It's very important that people are vetted and looked at carefully. We want the very best candidates, but that's also can be the start of a selection process that's not necessarily healthy. If that person is given too much power or along the way has been influenced by other people, maybe some of the best candidates have been weeded out for not the best of reasons. Also, I think it's really important that people at the school get a chance to visit with those people and be on the interview team. It is important to have a person that fits the building and fits the particular kind of teaching that's going on in that building, even though our elementaries have pretty much the same curriculum. But they have a different flavor, each one of them. And paying attention to that is important. I think that we need to make sure that we're hiring the very best possible person for that job, not the person that's the most popular. And sometimes that does happen in certain situations. So I think as a board we might want to look at the process a little more carefully. You never know when a real gem is going to show up, and you may need some flexibility in those terms, but I think there's some interesting things that have gone on.
Anecdotally, questions about nepotism, conflicts of interest, favoritism have been related to me. I don't know that. It seems like there is a problem. It seems like I'm aware of certainly one principal leaving after 1 year. There seems to be some problems. And I think some of the process that has been, some of the process issues that have been discussed by Donna and Ruth are worthwhile for a new board to explore. In my time remaining, I would like to go back real quickly and just let you know I do agree with Steve Hammaker in regards to the voc space question. One of the purposes for the bond was to add square footage, and there is to the building, and there is a question coming up about the voc space, vocational education space, and it is at the top of the list, and there's some choices that are going to be made because of some limitations on funds, and hopefully that these issues will get resolved. The other thing I would say, at least as to this topic, and there's people in the audience, you can ask them later, I think as to this topic, I felt like the committee actually did get good feedback from teachers in voc ed, that I think Mr. Quest actually met with them and met with people, and it was because Mike Massey pushed very, very, very hard to try to get that done. But I think that part of the process was done very well. Now, the article that I saw in the newspaper suggested we were back a year and a half and like we hadn't had some of those conversations. But I agree with what Mr. Hammaker said.
Thank you. Do any of you like drinking water? Somebody? I'll have one.
Do you want to drink?
Okay, no, I just didn't want you to run out. All right, now switching to a topic a little bit beyond the Albany County School District, and that's the next generation of science standards related to that, of course, the Common Core. What are your thoughts?
I don't know enough about the topic to give you an intelligent answer, to be honest with you. I have some thoughts, but they're...
Well, give
I
us
think
some thoughts.
I think it's an incredibly complicated, politicized, overblown issue that I don't think it's as much. I think that the district should embrace the Common Core approach. I hope it's implemented properly. I hope it's not revised by our legislature in certain ways. That's about as far as I think I can go about it.
Common Core has come to us from the state. And so at this point, I have not looked at the materials and don't know very much about it. I'm not really very happy having the state.
What do you think about the concept, though, of a common curriculum
For the whole
in general
United
for the United
States?
Yeah.
I think it's silly. And simply because, the reason I believe that is because our children are far different from children in urban areas. And our teachers know our children best, and if you're going to impose a curriculum on the whole in the United States, it's not one size fits all. And I'm really concerned about that. I like to have, you have to have books and you have to have curriculum. I have no problem with that. You also have to empower teachers who are teaching our children to look at how it's being used, how the children are reacting to it, and have some degree of ability to change things in order that our children learn properly. Whenever you have curriculum that keeps revolving every 2 years, like we've had in the elementary school, both in reading and in math, it's very, very hard on the teachers. It's very hard on the children. They don't have enough time to look at the curriculum and find out where the holes are because it's not written for our children per se. And what can happen is that our children end up with holes in their education that the high school people and junior high people find.
I'm Common Core to death, leaving this district. It's got good things to it. It gives us a guideline. I like that. But with that guideline, we need the flexibility. Common Core has very, very high standards, which oftentimes leaves the parent out of the picture. It is too difficult for parents to help kids with certain math, and it just, there are pieces to it that just don't fit with us. You always have to look at your demographics when you're looking at curriculum. What fits with us? We could be flexible with it. I worry about any type of, the government's controlling everything and it's Common Core and everybody does the same thing on the same page. I really do believe that it's got a wonderful backbone to it, but you have to have the flexibility to do what your district needs. And we don't want somebody, mandating and telling us you must do this. So, there's a lot of caution with it, but we do need some type of guidelines for curriculum because we've kind of gotten way away from a lot of things. So I like the structure of it, but flexibility with it.
I feel like there's 2 questions on the floor, so quickly I will say the issue with the science standards is frustrating to me as a board member. Our district has a very wise policy that was passed many years ago by people way before my time that addresses the teaching of controversial subjects. And it suggests that we should make sure that our students are aware of both sides of a controversial subject and depending on their age and maturity, that they're given the opportunity to make some of those decisions themselves and as a family and to talk about those things. And the issue that we're facing with science frustrated me because it is one of those controversial political issues, and I feel like our legislature took away the ability for our community and our school board and our teachers to make those decisions about what was appropriate for our kids. As far as Common Core goes, I do see value in aligning what the kids are expected to learn across states. Especially for our community, we're very transient. The number of kids that I've seen struggle because they're coming from a community where the kids were either more advanced or behind, we end up addressing and spending a lot of time in our district on gaps, and I think there's some value in that. But again, I think we need to keep remembering that curriculum is different than standards. Standards is what they should be learning. Curriculum and how they're learning it is up to us, and it's up to the teachers. I think that's important for us to hang on to when we talk about Common Core implementation.
Steve just last words were exactly what I was going to start with. We need to understand the difference between standards and curriculum. And Common Core and the next generation standards are also two very separate things. Common Core has been adopted. Next generation science standards have not been adopted. The next generation science standards will give our students exposure. It is not intended to be an opinion. It is intended to give exposure to the information that is there. And that will come from embracing a strong curriculum that goes with those standards. And to keep those two things separate is very important in our minds, because the Common Core does not tell you how to teach. It does not tell you what book to teach from. It does not give you the format of how you are communicating this information. You then choose as a school district, what curriculum is going to best fit your students' needs, and that's where we can recognize our demographic. And yes, I do wish that we as a state and as a school district would adopt the science standards.
Okay, now here's one that's along kind of a similar vein. Jeffco in Colorado is presently embroiled in a dispute between the school board and teachers and students regarding curriculum standards for U.S. history and I guess maybe some other things. How would you prevent something like that from occurring here in Laramie? Or do you think it even could occur here in Laramie?
Yes, that could occur here in Laramie. I've lived here long enough to know that is true. When there isn't enough consensus, when there isn't enough input, you're going to have people extraordinarily disgruntled. When you take an AP curriculum, which is what is going on in that school district, and you then decide that that AP curriculum is going to be taught differently for your state or for your school district than for the rest of the country, that is going to cause students, and I would hope it would, for politically minded high school juniors and seniors to really take issue with what's going on. Again, it comes to this sense of consensus, this sense of having been heard. Just because you don't get your way doesn't mean that you have not found some point where you can say, okay, I've made my point, I've been heard. I haven't found that here in our school district, where we can say, okay, I've made my point, I've been heard. And that is why we're all here, so that we can now start to have that kind of consensus. So do I think that can happen? Yeah, I think that could happen here. Would I like to see that happen here? No. I don't think that that's a very productive way of educating students.
I think the mistake that school board made is that they did not clearly express their intentions to the community, and they didn't listen. I think when you have a controversial issue like that is that big, you postpone decisions, you have public forums, you give people a chance to come to the table and share their opinions. But I'm also recognizing that the more I read about that issue, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of rumor in that community. And the school board is really desperately trying to recover, because there's some very loud voices spreading misinformation through that community that's causing the outrage and the walkouts and the students to protest. And I think the challenge that board has is to keep misinformation from getting out in the community, and they need to correct that. I think that that's one of the biggest challenges we've had with our school district. We see a lot of rumors and misinformation and sometimes intentional disruptions going on in our school district. And I think it's important that we address those and we find the facts and make sure that the correct information is out there in the community. Thanks.
And I agree, it could happen. I think your curriculum needs to be pretty solid, you know, what it is you're going to teach. And you know, also, if you have something that the board adopts, if it's not working, give yourself the out. I mean, if you've got parents and students who have an issue with whatever's going on, listen to them, weigh it very carefully, and go from there, but keep the parents in it. Keep the parents in it. Listen to the kids. Every situation is different, but I think parents need to at least feel like they're going to be heard. Students especially need to feel like they're being heard. But if you have a pretty good, solid curriculum in place that says it's this, this, and this, it's a good possibility you could avoid that.
There's always a possibility it could happen here. I would certainly work towards not ever having it happen here. But when you aren't communicating well with the public and your parents, all the stakeholders, it's a real possibility. In the end, we have an opportunity coming in November to choose carefully who it is that sits on our school board, because the school board is the elected representatives of the people, and also they are invested with making the decisions. And I would hope that in the decision-making process, we were careful to include everyone that wanted to have a voice in some way or other. And it's back to the communication piece. If you aren't communicating well with people, if you're not answering emails or phone calls, and you don't have access to the people that you really want to talk to, you get really frustrated, and it's really easy for things to take in the rumor mill to take a hold of those kinds of things, and all kinds of things to happen. I think it's really important that starting at the school level, we have site-based things where people have input. Parents have input at that point. I don't care what we call it, but there just needs to be a lot more talking among people in small ways and in small committees, so those things can be averted.
I think Jeffco is an example of what could happen here in Laramie if distrust and low morale continues and builds on itself. People will get fed up, and so if it's rumors and misinformation will build into that. That could happen when things get bad enough. But from my limited experience, I was a little surprised at the quality, timeliness, and resistance to provide information to a committee that just wanted to help make the community better and help the district. It was a little surprising to me, things that happened at times. And so if there was some other issue relating to hiring or students and distrust and morale built, coupled with rumors and misinformation, absolutely, people could be walking out of class.
Good. Now we'll move to a pedestrian question. Can the high school alleviate the problems of traffic sprawl that come with this location? I'm not sure how.
Yes.
Chicken.
I don't know what traffic sprawl means necessarily. That's my first problem. If the concern is that the location of the high school is going to cause traffic problems, I would hope that the district and the city of Laramie have worked to have enough access points, enough street access points that's not going to be a problem. As I saw these plans, and it sure looks like there's going to be enough access and lights and all those sorts of things. Ultimately, I would hope it accesses all the way to the interstate and we have another interchange, would be my ultimate hope. So I just don't, I don't see it as a problem, but I guess time might prove me wrong.
Well, anytime two or more are gathered, we in Laramie think there's a traffic problem. And that's one of the reasons why we live here. I don't know exactly what the problems are going to be. I don't think we're going to know until we actually get in operation. And I would hope that once we get in operation and take a real look at it and see how it's actually going to function, that if it needs to be fixed, we can do that without too much hassle. I know that people have worked on that. I guess I'm going to take a wait and see attitude. There's all kinds of you know, I'm full of ideas. You could stagger the classes when they dismiss. You could, you know, have, you could have, you know, only certain. You could insist that kids ride the bus more. Some of those things would be mightily impossible and unpopular, but there are ways. And I think we have creative people in our community who can help solve those things if, in fact, the people who have actually been doing the engineering work haven't solved them.
This is where I really rely on the people who are experts on this, because, you know, you would think they would look at all of it, and there are different entrances and exits to it, and, you know, I guess it is kind of a wait and see. You know, I look at the high school now, and it doesn't seem to be much of a traffic sprawl. I know it gets hectic, but you know, as a general public, when to not be going down those streets. So I'm sure we'll figure it out when we're out there. So.
You know, I got to apologize. When I reread this question, it says sprawl and traffic. But hey, anyway, go ahead.
I'm certainly not an expert on traffic either. I think, you know, walking around the area, we may have some challenges for the first couple of years as that area gets developed. There's some additional roads and outlets that won't be there for a while. I think once they're in there, that's part of the plan. I have to tell you that one of my bigger concerns is the 12 o'clock rush to Walmart and what Garfield Street's going to, or I'm sorry, Walmart, McDonald's. We've all heard those stories about the race to the fast food, and now that it's right there, I'm hoping maybe there's a great way to put in a walking trail or let them walk off some of those calories so that it's not a driving race. Thanks.
I would not know how to manage traffic. I'm not a city planner. I will say that as a parent of a driving high school student and 4 driving high school students, Mr. Street's smiling at me because he knows them all, I am concerned about Grandin 30th. I'm going to go on the record as saying that right now. I have reservations about that. I'd like to think that people who have looked at this plan also see that that particular intersection is going to be a very frightening place getting to and from school all day. And that we're going to pay very close attention for our kids, because high schoolers are in cars, and they're in cars at lunch, and they're in cars, and they're in cars before school, during school, and late after school. And so, yes, I do have concerns, and I'd like to think that our city is paying close attention to that.
Okay, I'm not going to read all of this, but the teachers' salaries rank in the bottom 25% of teacher salary in Wyoming. Is this wage discrepancy between the 140% that the superintendent earns in the state, and how would you deal with that problem?
How would I deal with the problem of the discrepancy between the superintendent, or how do I deal with raising
Well, I guess it
the
comes to me
teachers'
down
salaries?
to the perceived difference between the top and the bottom, right?
I suppose we could do what Ben and Jerry's did and say that nobody can earn 20% difference from the top person, but how do we deal with that? I actually do think that it's an issue that our salaries for teachers are lower than the state average, and I don't think about it in terms of a discrepancy from top to bottom. I think of it in terms of a discrepancy from peer to peer around our state. I would like to see a larger. I'd like to see salaries increase, especially since our real estate market is more expensive. It's expensive for people to live here. I want to recruit and retain the best teachers. I think that we have successfully done that for many, many, many years, but I also know that teachers leave and go places where they feel that they can have better lives for themselves and their families, because it's expensive to live in our community on a teacher's salary.
I'd love to see as a profession we continue to work toward increasing the compensation that our teachers get for the hard work that they do. However, I have had a perspective change as a school board member, and I think that our district needs to really focus, in order to be good stewards of the resources that we have, on market-driven wages and salaries. I think we need to remember that our position in the state is worth considering, but we also need to look at our position in the nation. We need to look when we advertise teacher positions, that if we're getting 3 or 4 poor applications, or like our district often gets is hundreds of applications from all over the country. And we need to think about whether or not wages are affecting our market to get good, excellent, high-quality teachers. I think we've seen some issues in our districts with administrators. We've seen principals leave this district for higher pay. We have seen trouble recruiting sometimes the high-quality people that we're looking for. And we saw our board respond to that and try to make some changes. It's an ongoing concern and argument, but I think that as a board, we have to always come back to the market and what's driving the highest quality that we can for our students in our buildings. Thanks.
Equity, that's the way I look at it. Equity from the top to your teaching staff. There's quite a difference in there. And, you know, you're hearing communication problems, curriculum problems, all sorts of problems. Now, if, you know, we're paying that 140% over whatever the state average is, I guess my opinion is if you're paying top dollar, you should be getting the very best. Those kind of problems should be pretty non-existent, because you're gonna, you know, I always say, you pay for what you get. Our teachers, you know, they, you know, like Melissa said, living in this community as a teacher it's expensive to live here. And you have 2 teacher salaries maybe, and sure, you can go other places, and a lot of people do, and go to, you know, other communities in Wyoming and love it, but, you know, you shouldn't have to leave. You shouldn't have to lose quality people because of our salaries. I think we can look at our budgets a little differently and figure out how we can make these salaries a little more equitable from the top to the bottom.
I've had a very varied teaching career and grew up in a household where my mother was a teacher for the school district. And at one point, they had a group that was for elementary teachers and for high school teachers, because elementary teachers typically have to have more supplies in terms of art and books and those kinds of things than do the high school teachers. And elementary teachers found that they did not have enough money to buy the supplies that they really needed, and so they split the 2 groups. And they got back together, but they eventually made their point. You have to be really careful. We're one of the poorest districts in the state, and it's much better. I went through the time when they changed and did not have to rely solely on our taxes here to support our schools, and that has really been a wonderful thing in our state, that we have a better equity of opportunity in terms of money. But we still need to be very careful how we allocate all the money, because we don't want to ever short our teachers in terms of the supplies they need in the classroom, as opposed to having to buy most of it. I taught in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which was right next to Detroit, and the teacher I taught with came from Detroit, and she said, "I'm so happy to be here." She said, "I have money for supplies," and I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes, I had to save up." In Detroit, they spent all the money on teacher salaries, and she said, "I had to save for 2 years to buy a pair of scissors." It was very scary. I don't want that to happen here, and I don't think it will, but we need to look at the budget really carefully.
I largely agree with Ruth and Donna. We're a mineral poor county. We have a weak tax base to some degree, with the university being exempt for a lot of things. So we're talking about a revenue stream, and honestly, to improve teacher salaries is probably a legislative solution more than anything. You know, how much you pay the administration or your superintendent, hopefully you're paying for quality. And you know, there's only a perceived problem if you're unhappy with who's running the show.
Okay. It is the opinion of more than a few people, according to this, that a current school board has become a rubber stamp in its decision-making for the central administration. As an individual on the school board, what will you do to ensure that the new board will not fall victim to the same label?
I think I answered that question with my first answer, and that is, I think it starts with demanding or requiring that the agenda that's going to be for that evening be circulated with the board members to add to it or to revise to it. And then once an agenda is agreed upon by the board and the administration, then you make sure that the materials that are going to be relevant to the meeting and to that agenda item are complete and timely provided, so you have an opportunity to ask meaningful questions. You ask meaningful questions, you get follow-up, and you go from there. And it is my perception, and I keep saying this in my limited experience, that really that is falling down.
I think as a board member of various boards, one of the things that drives me absolutely craziest of all is to come to a meeting and find something in the packet that I've never seen before. And I've never had a chance to read or to peruse or to ask questions of other people before I get there. So that would be one thing that I don't know if it's happening on that school board, but it can happen on boards. I think one of the things that also I would like to see is having some sort of boards that the board has committees that look into curriculum and into finance and into personnel, so that those things are hashed in many different ways before they come to the board. The hospital board's been accused of being a rubber stamp for the administration, but that isn't true. We have lots and lots of committees, and almost all of the action items that come before that board have been talked about amongst all the staff at the hospital. Then they come to the board in their board committees, and then they finally come to the board for a decision. And I think that's a really good way to have input, so that all of the people have access and are participating in the decisions.
I think the key is the agenda, and that the agenda gets to the board members in a very timely fashion of, I've heard board members say they've gotten the agenda on a Sunday night and they have a meeting on Wednesday. You've seen those packets? They're like this thick. And there's a lot of information in there. And to be a good board member, you need to read. You need to read what's in there. You need to ask questions before you go into the board meeting. So that agenda and all the information that goes with it needs to be in that packet, delivered many, many days ahead of schedule. People work, people have jobs. They need to have time to read through that packet. That way, if they have questions, they can call central office or a building or a teacher or what's going on, so you are informed when you're sitting there in the meeting, so you can have dialogue and have meaningful dialogue and show the community that you do listen and that you do have a concern for what's going on in the schools.
The perception of a rubber stamp board concerns me. It's been coming up for quite a while. I've tried to figure out where that comes from, if it's real, if it's true. And one of the things that I've been trying to work on to improve that with some of my fellow board members is changing the structure of our board meetings. We have asked the chair, who has directed our attorneys, to work on changing policies so the public comment is more involved in our board meetings. I also want to point out that the board is responsible for policy. And a lot of times when we hear these kind of things, it's usually an administrative decision that the board was never involved in, and then we get accused because it's not appropriate for us to be involved in some of those administrative decisions of approving it by silence. And I think we need to be very clear about the role of a board member is to set policy. And policies, by law in our district, go through 3 readings. If it's controversial, often we'll have public hearings. We'll have the time that we need to process that information and talk about it. So I think it's important for us as a board to work on that perception, talk a little bit more about ways that we can improve the input that we're getting from the community before decisions are made. And I think we're headed in the right direction. Thanks.
I do agree. Oh, turned off. That's okay. Back on again. Can I start again? I do agree that that the agenda is the place to begin. I also, as a community member, would like to know what that agenda is before I arrive to the meeting. I arrive at those meetings and sometimes I look at those agendas and think, who made this up? Where did it come from? And I've asked my board members that, and often my board members know where it came from, but what's included in it is not stuff that they have wished to have included, that they have asked for. We need to have a process to vet, to appreciate what is going into those agendas so that the whole community can see before they even arrive at those meetings what's going to be discussed. And as far as policy goes, it's very hard to read through the policy of our school board. I don't know if any of you have spent time trying to do that, but it's not a very well searchable document, and I have had very specific policy questions, and I don't receive response. So, yes, I do think that the agenda and having all board members having the ability to put input into that agenda is very important.
You know, maybe you've kind of answered this, but it's related. So the board sets policy, and the board also oversees the practice, the superintendent and so on. How do you do that? Oversight.
So I think that in order to set policy, we need to understand what's in our policies. And so reading through all of our policies and getting them into some searchable format so that we can receive input from the public, I think is an important first start. And in terms of directing the superintendent, we do not, as board members, dictate what the superintendent does. You set the goals in a joint fashion, and then you hold the superintendent accountable to achieve those goals without excuses. And that's what I would look for in terms of oversight.
I think we have to be very careful as a board not to create so many policies that we remove flexibility in decision making. And the flip side of that is accountability. Hiring is a great example. If we have an administrator who is making poor hiring decisions, and we consistently see that affecting our district, or delegating that to people that are continuing to make poor decisions, I think that's our role in that situation, is to call them out on it. Look and see if there's something that we need to do through development or staff changes. But I believe that we have to exercise caution in setting all of that into some kind of a strict policy that removes flexibility in decision making from all the people that work in the district. Thanks.
I think the superintendent needs to have goals just like everybody else in the district has. And those should be looked at, and they should be evaluated by the board periodically, not when it's time to renew a contract. Listen to your public, to your teachers, and to the principals when there are concerns, and deal with that. I mean, there's more than just whatever the superintendent's going to set as a goal. There are a lot of things there, and policy is crucial. We need policy. I mean, that's one of the downfalls we're in right now. It's, what is the policy? I mean, it used to be, we had, the big blue book, and you had to read it, and you did everything but sign in blood. Now you don't even have that book. It might be online somewhere, I'm not really sure. But, if you know what the expectations are, it's pretty easy to evaluate that. And the same goes for a superintendent. If he knows what the expectations are, and these are the goals, and that's how you evaluate them. You'd find out if they're worth 140% above the average in the state. And I'm not saying that facetiously, I'm saying that seriously, because we're all held accountable for what we do, and I think it should be for the board's responsibilities. Make sure this district is run smoothly, and that's through the policies.
It's tricky. The board makes the policies, and then they need to be assured that they're being followed. Micromanaging is not ever a good idea, because then it means that the person you've hired, the school board's only hire as a superintendent, isn't doing a good job. However, in order to figure out if the policies are being followed, you need to go into the schools. I love to visit schools. There's all kinds of opportunities to visit schools. Youth Art Month is a wonderful one. You can go to music programs, you can go to athletic events, you can make yourself available to be invited. I think sometimes I just like to go and introduce myself to the principals and visit with them. I like to dig around and find out what's going on in terms of what's happening to children. If they would invite me into a classroom, I'd be thrilled. It's really important that you are visible. I don't think once a month going to eat in the cafeteria at a school is enough. I have all other kinds of ideas that I'm not sure are practical, but I think that communication is just really important.
I think everyone has already said sort of the things that I think that I feel also. Just ask questions at the board meetings. Ask meaningful questions and informed questions, and if you don't get answers, then start thinking about real accountability for non-answers or non-performance. And I think that's one of the things that has to be taken up whoever is elected. I don't know what long-term planning or 5-year planning or 3-year planning that the school board does. I've been involved with that previously on other boards with professional facilitators, and those sorts of things are actually really, really valuable. I know Donna's probably been through it, but it's really valuable because then you can articulate and write down your actual goals that you can hold your CEO or CFO or your employees to, and it drives policy also. But and I don't know if we have that in this district, in the school district or not, but that would be one of my suggestions for oversight.
Okay. All right. This is kind of on the same line. It's important for the district to have a clearly articulated long-range vision. How do you establish that vision? How would you do?
By hiring a professional facilitator. You can do it yourselves. You can go on retreats. There's many ways to do it. You can go on retreats. You can hire a professional facilitator. You can go through the process and you evaluate your policies and revise your policies, and you build a plan, a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan, whatever it is, but you do it, and then you actually carry it out, and you actually carry it out. See what happens.
I would love to have a superintendent I love to have people around that have vision. I think that a visionary is incredibly important to a school district. And I think the role of the superintendent should be a person who has a vision. Then that person can articulate those kinds of visions he has for the school district, and you can make some plans around some of those things. I think it's also important for teachers to have goals, for those to be given to shared with the principal, for the principal to then make some goals for the school through what the teachers might be saying, for the principal to bring those things to the superintendent, for the superintendent to look them over and bring them to the school board. I think top down and bottom up is really good. It's a way of having dialogue about what we want to be and how we want to get there. And I think those dialogues are incredibly important. You can do it lots of different ways. You can have facilitators come in. It just depends. Maybe there's somebody in the district who we could ask to do that for us. But I think for me, it's one of the things that's missing. I don't think we have a vision.
And just pretend I said everything Jason and Donna said, and then I'm just going to keep adding to it. I think when we're looking at long-range planning, we have 2 areas. We have the academic piece and we have the building piece, and those need to be continuous and ongoing. Our curriculums need to be that even flow of what's coming up, so you have a time frame, that you are looking at, you know, we used to have a 5 to 7 year plan or whatever, but you need to look at that as time changes. But you need to have curriculum and academic piece, and you also need the building plans. So I heard, you know, we've got, you know, 2 new elementary schools in the making, or, you know, whatever. What are they going to do with the Indian paintbrush? Are they going to add on to it? They know they desperately need to. Where's that plan? You know, that's what I'd like to see. And truly, with the visionary superintendent, that's what we need to lead us and to listen to when the community says, you know, we need this or we need that, or the teachers say the same thing, that they're being listened to.
In my career, strategic planning is the greatest thing ever in nonprofit world, and I've seen it go through many cycles, and often you do all that work and it ends up on a shelf, where you have a staff transition and all those things kind of disappear. And so I do agree that this district needs to do some work on creating the vision and some of those strategic planning, and at least come to a consensus on the direction that we want to go on some specific points. But I think it needs to be simple. I don't think we need a 500-page plan that many people aren't going to read. I think that we need to just spend some time slowing down, looking for a few specific points that we can all agree and support. I have yet to find anybody in the district that disagrees with the idea that our goal is to educate our students to the highest quality possible. There's rarely an argument about that, and I think that's a starting spot. But I know that when we move into the discussion of how do you do that, we're going to have lots of differences of opinion. But I think that as a community, we can come to some consensus, and we can head in some general direction. I'm excited that we've actually started moving in some of that direction, where the current board has directed administration to take a look at different leadership models. We've heard site-based tossed around a lot. We're looking at some other ways of doing that, and we know that there's lots of research on those kind of things. And the process has started, where we are going to seriously form some groups and committee. Oh, I'm getting cut off.
We need to start with the end in mind. We know where we want to go. We know what we would like to see out of our students. And like Steve said, we would like to have the best possible outcome for our students. Setting short-term and long-term goals, those short-term goals should not get shelved. They should be short, attainable goals working towards that end result. I have not seen any of those types of goals set in a school district setting. I have seen them set in the school that I worked for. I know that Ms. Bush has been setting those now for the high school, and that she is working towards that end. I do not know how that's going. I have not spoken with my colleagues at the high school, but I do know that there is a vision toward that. I think we need that vision to be a whole school community vision as to what it is. And I do agree that if we end up with a huge book, nobody's going to read it. So yes, keeping it simple, but having true outline goals that we have constant check-in, lots of accountability, lots of where are we now, no excuses when we don't reach them, is a way that we can get moving forward on our school district.
Okay, we've come to 8:30, and I'm just going to go through this one more time. And what I'd like to ask you is kind of put you on the spot. What do you think your most positive characteristics for this job are? I mean, what makes you unique? What makes you differentiate you from the other candidates?
I worked here in Albany County School District for 4 years, and prior to that, I worked for 8 years at one of the top school districts in the country, Fairfax County Public Schools in Northern Virginia. I have a vision of how it works really, really well. And I would like to cooperate and bring pieces of that here where they fit. I have now raised 4 kids through our high school and a couple of them through our middle school. And I have a lot of insight into what's happening in our school district. Having been a middle school teacher, I've helped to bridge kids between elementary and high school. So I have a fabulous bent on curriculum. So I have a lot of unique experiences. Prior to being a teacher, I've worked for educational publisher. Prior to that, I worked for a large not-for-profit medical association. I have a lot of experience managing budgets, managing staff, managing curriculum, and working at a very, very successful school district.
I've spent my entire career helping people build relationships, primarily with kids, and I think that's one of my strong points. I joined the board at a time when trust was seriously broken between many employees, teachers, administration, and board, and I've committed and worked very hard over the last 4 years to try to rebuild some of that trust. I think some of the information concerns that we have is because we had an administrator that was keeping it too close, because if we share things, we get criticized. And as a board member, I've worked very hard to try and rebuild those relationships, not just between board and admin, but with everyone in the district. I don't think it's fixed. I think there's still relationships that are broken. I think there's concerns that we still need to keep working on. But I think building relationships, listening to people, and helping them understand that the work that we do, we can have different values and we can disagree, but we can be civil, we can work together, we can find common ground, and we can work toward improving education for our kids.
I've just come off from 35 years, retired in this district. I've only been in Albany County School District. It's been just an honor and a pleasure to have worked in this district. I've seen ups and downs. I think I've seen everything that's gone on. And I just feel like there are so many things that are in chaos. There are many, many things that are right. Okay, I think I've picked away at things, but there's so much that is so good about this district. I mean, we've heard, the kids do well. They're marvelous, and they do that because they have excellent teachers, and we want to keep our excellent teachers. And I feel the piece that I will bring to the board is I have that communication. I still have that teacher contact. I understand what's going on. We did a climate survey, and I read through every single one of those comments, and the theme that came out was fear, retribution, no input, and you don't want that. And when you have that as a result of the survey, deal with it. Don't shove it under the rug. Deal with it. This is the way people are feeling. If it's true or not, this is the way your teachers are feeling. This is the way other administrators feel. It isn't just teachers. Let's build that respect back, and let's make this district even better than what it is now.
Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a question asker. I have, any place I've ever been, I've asked questions and brought things to a halt through one reason or another. That's what I like to do. I like to look at the big picture. I love this school district. I know lots of the people. We have many fabulously wonderful teachers. I don't feel like they're being heard in the way in which they will find satisfaction. So one of the things I really believe that I can bring is an understanding of how things work and how we can help make them better. I have proven experience at the hospital, helping those people there resolve a situation that was not good. I'm finding one of the reasons I'm running for school board is because I find that situation here in our school district. I think with a little bit of effort on all of our parts, we can get back on track and have a fabulously wonderful school district. I always believe that there's a possibility for improvement in everything.
Share 3 things about myself that might be helpful to answer the question. I think most of you know in the room that I'm an attorney here in town. I've practiced for about 20 years, and I've been fortunate enough because I have a varied practice, whether it deals with real estate issues or contracts or deals with financial issues or a combination of all those things. I have a lot of experience advising individuals and corporations in regards to these issues, and I think that's an asset I can bring to a board. I just I have difficult situations. I can really be on the other side of the fence. I'm sure that Jen and Peggy have found me not always to be that fun to deal with sometimes, but I think we get along. At the end of the day, we get along fine. And so I'm willing to have a hard conversation with people about a topic, but I'm also willing to be your friend at the end of the day also. The second thing is both my mom and dad are school teachers. My mom was an elementary school teacher. My dad was a high school English teacher and then ultimately a principal. He's retired here to Laramie part-time. And if you're wondering a little bit about my background, I grew up in the house of teachers. And then finally, I've made Laramie my home for the last 25 years. Both my kids are in the district. My wife works at the city for a long time. Her mom and dad live here. All my nephews and nieces go to school here. And so I'm here to stay, and I'm just interested in doing what's best for the community.
Yeah, I think we're all fortunate to have such thoughtful responses from these candidates and so well informed. And I think we all ought to give them a hand. I'm supposed to remind you two things. One, you can come up and talk to the candidates, and also you got to put the chairs away.
Before you begin putting the chairs away, if you just kind of slide them to the side, feel free to mingle and chat a bit. And when it gets close to 9, we'll begin stacking the chairs. That way we don't have all the ruckus going on with chair stacking, and you do have a chance to do what you came to do, which is talk to the candidates, hopefully. And then I have another reminder, though, that we do have 3 more forums. October 9, we will have the county attorney, county assessor, and clerk of district court here. October 16 will be our city council candidates, all wards. And October 23 will be the county commissioner candidates and House District 44 and 45 candidates. So we welcome you to return.
Nancy, could
Yeah.
you explain the 3 elected from Area A?
Yeah, there's 3 positions open in Area A. So, yeah. So,
The other people don't have to be reelected that are in area, right?
well, no, that's not true. We do have Area B and Area C, but they're not contested elections. So I think those candidates are here.
Ken Crawford came in.
Yeah, I've seen them, yeah. If you want to stand up, Ken, you can. This is one of our other school board candidates. All right,